President Cyril Ramaphosa is due to address the media later today in response to a report by the Public Protector on allegations that he violated the Executive Ethics Code. The report made adverse findings against President Ramaphosa over a 500,000 rand campaign donation received for his ANC presidency campaign. Public Protector Mkhwebane on Friday announced that she found Ramaphosa deliberately misled Parliament about the 2017 donation from services company Bosasa. Yesterday, the presidency indicated that Ramaphosa submitted a substantial response to Mkhwebane's preliminary findings in late June, saying they were deficient in both fact and law. Now, for more on the story, we are now joined on the line by political analyst Sanusha Naidu. Good afternoon, Sanusha. Thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon, Mahindra.
Now, what do you think will come out of the press briefing by the president?
Well, I think to a large extent it was almost incumbent on the president to essentially make this press briefing, particularly given the serious nature of the report that the Public Protector has released, and of course findings that he deliberately misled both Parliament in terms of the donation, but more importantly in terms of the conduct of his office as Deputy President as well at the time. So I think in terms of that and the severity of the situation, the President will probably try and address that, and also probably use the occasion to take the trust of the nation into his confidence, etc., with regard to how he may cooperate with the Public Protector following her release of the statement on Friday afternoon. And I think to a large extent this is a situation where if we take out all of the issues around the underpinnings and the timing and the questions around the politics of the situation, and we just solely focus on the technical operations of the Public Protector's office, I think it raises very serious concerns and raises serious context in terms of what her statement was on Friday afternoon. And that in itself, I think, is something that we have to consider in the context of the fact that her office is a Chapter 9 institution, and of course that it's one that is supposed to protect the integrity of the state and the democracy.
So what are the main sticking points in the report itself?
Well, up until now, it's been the question of the Bosasa donation. And more importantly, I think the question is how much of that kind of confines itself in the gray area of whether or not that was a donation that may have political undertones to what the implication was for that donation. But most importantly, the sticky point here is the response of the president in Parliament to that to that question. And we must bear in mind that this was an application brought by the leader of the Democratic Alliance, Mkhwebane, around asking the Public Protector to investigate this because of the response that the President gave in Parliament in terms of saying it was firstly a transaction to deal with his son's company, and then of course subsequently changing his position and his statement and saying in fact it was a donation to himself or to his campaign. But I think there are other sticky points as well that have come out in the last 48 hours, and even preceding this whole preceding the announcement on Friday afternoon, was the question around how much of the investigation, which I think the President and his legal team will raise in terms of jurisdiction by the Public Protector, in terms of how much she can actually investigate and whether she has jurisdiction to investigate. Particularly now she's raising questions of whether or not we're dealing with some level of money laundering in this whole process, and she's looking and has investigated into the transactional accounts and the transactions that underpin these accounts in terms of the value and the movement of money. Now, we have very important regulatory frameworks around how money is reported to the Reserve Bank. And of course, any incoming funds, as you and I would know, or people in the business sector would know, if you have money moving in and out of the account, if they're large sums, we have to basically register our transactions, incoming funds from overseas with the Reserve Bank and to the South African Revenue Services. So, in a sense, there's all those requirements, and perhaps this is where we are entering into not just a sticky area, but a gray area as well. Because if you go back and think about the fact that last year or the beginning of this year, this president signed into law the whole question around Political Party Funding Act, the legislation as well. So it's kind of all coming to home to roost in some kind of in a very sticky way, if you want to use that. And of course, the question now is how the president would respond to this in the media statement or the briefing he's going to give later on this afternoon or evening.
To your mind, how possible is it that, according to the president's knowledge, he was not deceiving Parliament?
It's a difficult one to answer, Mahindra, because I think the challenge we'll have to then assume that we know what the president's mind was at the time. And it's a very hard question to assume and make assumptions about. Only the president and his mind will know that. And I think that in terms of the angle in which it will be used as well, in terms of could he have genuinely not have anticipated, or perhaps the people. I think the challenge was also the fact that certain of his campaign advocates had essentially made certain. I mean, I think there was one or two individuals that came out earlier on and said that they had actually approached Gavin Watson of the former Bosasa company, and they asked for this donation, and it wasn't to the knowledge of the president. But it's again, it's a tricky one to answer because at the end of the day, you'll have to. In a court of law, you'll have to prove that there was intent to mislead, and then he'll have to disprove that there was no intent to mislead.
And we've just heard Limpopo Premier Stan Matabata saying that during the CR17 campaign, they received lots of funds from a variety of sources, and even and even he himself does not know where it came from.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably difficult in the court of public opinion to say that. I mean, I think people have already decided where they may find themselves. They have already made up their minds in certain ways about when it comes to money and of course with how funds are supposedly moving in and transactions are moving in terms of funds that are coming in, etc. As an individual, somebody may argue that you should know what's going on in your own political funding campaign. Mm-hmm. And of course, you are talking to the big funders, to the big benefactors, and therefore you are supposed to be on top of it. But sometimes, there are cracks that tend to emerge, and you could actually become slip through the cracks and you may not know. But I'm not saying this. I think it's very difficult for us to try and see how to frame this. And that's why it's such a sticky point because, yes. The president has used his ability and talked about dealing with the kinds of corruption, questions of money and questions of how issues of transactional legalities have informed the state. And I think to a large extent now we are sitting in the situation where we are kind of caught between the two spaces. One, just because of the nature of what the Public Protector's Office is about. And then on the other hand, the question is, could it be or could it not be? And I think that's where we are caught in terms of public opinion as well.
Absolutely. Now, here's a wild question for you. President Thabo Mbeki did not finish his term in office. President Jacob Zuma did not finish his term in office. They were both recalled. How likely is it that President Cyril Ramaphosa will finish his first term in office now that his credibility and integrity is being questioned?
Well, I mean, it's so difficult to predict at the moment. The predictability indicator is probably off the scales in different directions. Around this question, around many other questions about the state of governance and the state of the political body of the country, just where are we going, what we are doing, confidence levels, etc. One of the indicators, and I know I'm basically trying to talk around your question and not directly answer it, but one of the challenges around this is also looking at how markets have responded in the last couple of weeks, in particular with regard to questions at the Zondo Commission, appearance of former President Jacob Zuma, and so forth. But to me, it seems as if I wouldn't want to preempt and predict something because at this moment, to be quite honest, it's very difficult to give you an answer on that question. I think there are definitely elements and sections in the party that, in terms of the National Executive Committee deliberating on these issues, in terms of the Integrity Commission dealing with some of these questions, and of course the whole panel that's going to be chaired by the former President Motlanthe as well on some of the deliberations around the questions of credibility, integrity, and dealing with individuals, etc. around this. I think in terms of the political party, the ATM and all of that, I think it's going to be a lot of these things coming to the NEC for deliberation, and how the National Working Group within the party then takes this on. Right now, what I can say is that it's so fractured that from what the Premier of Limpopo has been saying, you can see how fractured this party is. You can see it in every it's palpable and tangible in the way that we're looking at the different responses and the reactions. So obviously, I would say perhaps just maybe we need to be careful of being premature of these questions. Yes. But at the same time, I think there are going to be deliberations in the party around this.
Well, thank you very much for that comprehensive insight, Sanusha Naidu.